Hi everyone, this is Dave Clark of EXE Consulting, and it is April of 2025, and I'm going to be discussing this amplifier simulator called Dual F. This is version 0040. The first knob here on the left is the input knob, which reduces the signal to minus 12 dB or plus 12 dB, in other words plus or minus 4 times. This is the gain, of course. This is not the same as the input. The gain is actually a circuit inside of the amp sim. This, of course, is the tone stack. The contour knob causes the tone stack to be darker or brighter as a whole. So basically it scoots the tone stack along the frequency axis back and forth depending on where you want it to be. It effectively gives you a bunch of different tone stacks, one for each position. Let me go ahead and attempt to demonstrate that for you here. This knob here, called pre-dirt, basically clips one side of the signal, say for example the upgoing signal or downgoing signal, and provides a little bit of extra dirt right on the input, but it's fairly crude. I'll try to demonstrate that here now. These next 6 screens, stage 1L, 1R, 2L, 2R, power amp left and right, are all dedicated to grid conduction models in the particular tubes. So this is for the first tube in the left stage, first tube in the right stage, second tube in the left stage, etc. These models get turned on by pressing the boost and turning that on. These next 4 knobs, the threshold, compression, tube gain, and makeup gain, are the typical things you'll see for a compressor. Now this grid conduction mechanism is an asymmetric compression mechanism, so it only compresses one side of the signal, similar to the pre-dirt where we're clipping just one side of the signal. Although the grid conduction mechanism is asymmetric for a single tube, in the case of the power amp, we have 2 tubes in a push-pull configuration, so the overall effect of this stage is a symmetric compression, so the distortion characteristics sound different than for the preamp tubes. These next 2 knobs, offset boost and grid LPFC, have to do with the bias that's created by the grid conduction mechanism. Here we filter the mechanism to make sure that it doesn't oscillate too much, and here we can boost the offset if we want to make it more pronounced. It's interesting to move this filter here up to about 20 Hertz or so. You get some kind of interesting slow oscillations, fairly slow oscillations, with a really interesting kind of swirling effect, and it's even more interesting when you have left and right channels at different settings. Now these next 2 screens, out FL and out FR, are left and right output filters. These are normally off, and you can turn them on here, output filters here, turn this on. Normally they're off. Normally we use cabs, not output filters. In some cases, however, you might want to use output filters. For example, in another video I give demonstrations of stacking 2 of these amp sims together, one on top of the other. And it might be better to use an output filter rather than a normal cab. However, there's another option I'll talk about in a minute. These output filters consist of a bandpass filter delineated by this low frequency and high frequency, in addition to which there's a notch, an optional notch, which scoops out mids if you want. Down here we have a low shelf and a high shelf frequency, which can be adjusted to emphasize some of the higher frequencies and some of the lower frequencies. On the options screen there are quite a few different options to be discussed here. First of all, there's different sizes of the screen, if you like, from tiny to giant, and then back to normal. The tone stack can be placed in two different positions for each channel. The vintage is between the first and second stages for both channels. Modern is after the second stage for both channels. Vint mod is vintage for the left channel, modern for the right channel, and the opposite is the case for mod vent. Here we have options for the voicing of the amp sim: electric guitar and electric bass. The electric bass is where all the capacitors are simply multiplied by a factor of 2, which changes the region of operation. Here we have options for input, which are stereo, left, right, or swap, and also options for output, mono and stereo. This is a little bit more complicated than it looks, so I'll try to do my best to try to explain what goes on inside the amp sim. For now, let's assume that you have a stereo track in a DAW. So you have a left signal and a right signal. Your options are to keep them and have them the left processed by the left channel settings in this amp sim, the right signal processed by the right channel settings in this amp sim, and everything would be as you would normally expect it to be. However, sometimes the left signal might be better than the right signal, and you might want to use it for both the left and right channels as output. In that case, you would select left, and it would be processed by two different methods. Be processed by the settings in the left channel for the left channel output, and in the right channel, the settings in the right channel for the right channel output. Now, in other cases, the right channel might be better, so you might want to choose the right signal to be processed through both the left and right channels. And you can do this with different settings, and it will give you a stereo signal as output. Swap just basically takes the left for right, as you might expect it to do. Now, when I said you can get a left channel out left and right, or a right channel input out left and right, that's only true if you have a stereo setting in output. Now, if you have this set to mono, what that means is that whatever comes into the left channel, whether it actually be the right signal or the left signal, is going to be processed through the left channel settings. This will be copied to the right channel right upon output. There will not be right channel processing at all internally. So be careful what you choose in with these settings. Now, this power amp switch, you can turn the entire power amp, both channels, left and right, off and on. This is useful in several different situations. There are some cab simulators that have their own power amps, so you can use it for that. You can use it when stacking amps if you don't want the first amp to have a power amp feeding into the second amp sim. There are probably other cases where you might want to use that. I've already discussed the output filters, and you can turn the cabs on and off. Now, this option here has three different settings. ZL crude, that's zero latency crude, meaning it's a very crude model for the cab, but it has zero latency. Norm is what you would normally use, and if you want zero latency for the normal one, you can choose this option here. There's also a bunch of different cabs for each channel. In fact, I think there's 41 or something like that for each channel, and you can use different cabs for the different channels if you want. These are the volume controls, the final output volume controls. In case there is some imbalance between left and right channels, you might want to use these. And these knobs in particular, if you do this, increase it, and then you do control click, it'll change the value back to the default value, but then you have to wiggle it a little bit to get it back to where it really is the default value. It doesn't repaint it properly for some reason. I've not been able to figure that out. Now, in connection with that, I should say that I built these amp sims more than 90% for myself. That was my motivation. And less than 10% motivated by other people being able to use them. So I'm providing these as a public service, so I hope people will recognize that. I'm not trying to be perfect here. Now I want to say something about these cabs because there's a few special ones in here. First of all, there's this one down here called RAD2540. That doesn't mean radical, that's a radio. So it's like a radio box, a small radio box for simulating a guitar amp going through a radio, a table radio or something like that. Another special set of cabs are these ones labeled IB. This stands for interface boxes. These are special cabinets that are very flat. They don't have mid scoops in them. And the primary idea behind having these in here was to allow stacking of one amp on top of another in a track, and to have a flat signal being transferred from one amp sim to the other rather than the scooped mids type that you would get if you used a normal guitar amp cabinet to connect the two together. I almost forgot to say anything about this button here, Write Preset. This does not save presets in VST3 format or any other format. What it does is it writes out C++ code, so it's of no use to users. It's just strictly for my use. Thank you.